The Franklin Leadership Series is a social nonprofit. What we focus on is really doing all we can to create future leaders today by providing them access to the best and brightest leaders across the country. We do that through, of course, webinar platforms, podcasts, internships, externships, scholarships, and it's our focus and our purpose. Today we have an exciting guest, a friend and colleague, and someone I think you're going to love. His name is Rus Bradburd. Russ and I have known each other for years, but he's an author. He's a coach, former coach, also teaches as well at New Mexico State University. But Russ attended Chicago Public High Schools for 11 years before graduating from North Park College in Chicago. After coaching basketball for 14 seasons at the University of Texas El Paso and New Mexico State University, he left the game to study with Robert Boswell and Antonia Nelson to pursue a life in writing. Russ has 4 books, and they focus on the intersection of sports, social progress, politics, and race. Russ also remained connected to the basketball community through his acclaimed Basketball in el Barrio summer program in El Paso, as well as serving as New Mexico State television color analyst. He is an accomplished fiddle player. He was also awarded a Fulbright Fellowship to return to Ireland in 2022 to work on his next book. He lives in Chicago, New Mexico, and I want to welcome Russ to the program. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Alex and Stacy and Cleo.
Well, Russ, we're going to kick it off as I introduce my colleague, Alex Waters, of course. He's Director of Talent and Development over Career Service at Morningside University, and we're going to get right into it. So, Alex, you go ahead and lead with the first series of questions.
No doubt. Well, thank you so much, Cleo. And Russ, we're excited about this opportunity to learn a little bit about you, your background, and share that advice with our listeners here today. So, Cleo, thanks for kicking us off and just being the catalyst for this program and this series. We're really excited. Russ, the first question I have, I always am interested in learning the beginning of people's journeys. And so I wondered if you could talk to me a little bit about what was one of your first coaching opportunities and really how it shape and maybe influence your trajectory, you feel?
Well, I'd have to start just to give a little bit of background. I was maybe the worst player in North Park College history. We were Division III. I was never good enough to make my high school varsity. I played with, that's where I met Cleo Franklin, my first couple of years of high school, but we moved to the suburbs of Philadelphia. I was never good enough to make the team, but I loved basketball and I wanted to be around it. And it didn't feel like a real job. And I was lucky enough at age 23, I got on at UTEP, the University of Texas El Paso. And maybe some of the viewers would remember Tim Hardaway, the famous player, the first Tim Hardaway Sr. But I worked for a crusty old legendary coach named Don Haskins. And Don Haskins was old school, sort of in the best ways. And but he was best known for winning the national championship in 1966. And he was the first coach to win the championship with 5 black starters. And it really changed college basketball. But I got very interested in his story and the story behind all those players. And I think from a pretty early age, I realized I was a lot more interested in the stories and sort of this window into African-American culture that basketball provided. I was always more interested in the stories in that window. In retrospect, I didn't know it then, but in retrospect, I wasn't as interested in the X and O's. I did my best, but I was no X and O genius. But I think it was the stories that really captivated me. And Don Haskins was a really charismatic figure. That he was a gruff guy and old-fashioned in many ways. And maybe I'll leave it there for now. But it started with Don Haskins and on the border. It was in El Paso, which is the largest population center in the Western Hemisphere that's on an international border.
No, I was just going to say, wow, it's insightful for you to think back, of what you were observing, and how those lessons or how those things that you were taking in so early on would then come to fruition or influence such your life, especially in your writings and things like that as you'd go on.
Well, one of the things that I think maybe the biggest lesson I got from Don Haskins was I remember when I first started, I had a notebook where I was going to write down everything I learned about basketball from him. And after the first year, I realized I'd only written a couple lines. That pretty much everything he said, anyone who knew basketball would know those things. But he only emphasized 2 or 3 things. And the rest of it, he never got caught up in the minutia. So he didn't care if our shoes matched, and he didn't care if the summer camp brochure was ready. Not that he didn't care, but he didn't stress that. He stressed, we've got to play defense. We're going to play great defense. We're going to share the ball. and we're going to really rebound. And you don't have to be a basketball expert to know that that's pretty elementary stuff, but he really drilled and focused on the elementary stuff. And so I've always done that myself since then. Like for now, I think I'm a writer and I'm a fiddle player, and I want to get a little exercise so I can stay fit. And so at the end of every day, I think, did I write today? Did I play my fiddle today? Did I get a little exercise? And did I hang out with my daughter? I have one daughter who's 15 now, but I do think that the biggest thing that I took away from Don Haskins is this idea that you can't stress everything. You can't be good at everything, and you have to pick. Time to think in coaching, if you're going to be good at one thing, it's at the expense of another. No one can be good at everything. And so, for example, you can't play like you can't play like Bobby Knight and play like Nolan Richardson. It's just not possible. And I would imagine that in the business world, it's true, is you can't do everything well, and you've got to decide what you're going to do.
That's great. Russ, this is a good segue because you have a blessed and interesting life, and you've been honored to work with Hall of Fame coaches. You just talked about Don Haskins, the Bear, who I affectionately love his nickname as well. But that being said, that you also work with Hall of Famer, of course, Nolan Richardson, and you work with Lou Henson. And one of the things that I'm interested in is, the lessons that are learned that are not just good on the court or on the football field, anywhere, but they also transferable over to life. For example, one of the lessons that I've learned in sports was to stay humble or be humbled. And that's something that always keeps me grounded. Could you share with us and the audience just a couple of lessons that you've carried over from your learnings with working with greats Nolan Richardson and also Lou Henson as well?
Well, I mean, my work with Nolan Richardson was primarily in writing his biography. But I will say the thing that I noticed about the three of them is they were very different in terms of style. Don Haskins was power of negative thinking. Had low expectations, would never be disappointed. Lou Henson was the opposite. He was the Illinois coach for many years, and he came out of retirement to coach at New Mexico State. But he was the opposite. He was completely upbeat and positive and optimistic. But and Nolan could be, played a completely different style and was more interested in the psychology of the game. But where they were all similar, Cleo, was they could be incredibly stubborn about some things and then remarkably flexible about others. And I remember hearing Don Haskins say, "I'm never going to coach a player with a tattoo." Well, pretty soon, everybody on the team had a tattoo. Not while I was there, but by the late 1990s, when he was still coaching, the whole team, everybody had a tattoo, it seemed. And Lou was the same way. As he could be remarkably kind. Like I remember there was times when we would go to the gym for a road. We were at Utah State. And we thought that we were going to practice at 1 p.m. at Utah State, but it turned out we can't get in the gym until 2:30 p.m. And now most coaches would have blown a gasket, would have really blown. But with Lou, he was very flexible about, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go into the film. We're going to go into their locker room, and we're going to watch more film. And he could easily change courses, particularly within the course of a game. And so one of the other thing that, in terms of being flexible, is they would both come up with these really strong game plans. And then everything went to hell, excuse me, but everything would go to hell by halftime, and you had to make adjustments. And so it was great to start out with a game plan, and but you had to be ready to say that game plan's not working. Now we're going to make adjustments. Today, I think with COVID stuff, where the plot or the challenge is always changing. But I know it's happened for me as a writer. When I first started the Nolan Richardson book, my angle was, he was talking about racism all the time, and here's a guy who's making $1 million a year, and my original idea was sort of halfway expose him as the boy who cried wolf, that old thing. But then the more I looked into Nolan's life, I thought, he's right about everything here. And once I heard the whole story, I really became a great believer in that he was correct about things. And so the book I started to write is complete. If you read the beginning of the book, you'll think it's headed in one direction, but right. It takes a strong turn where I came to understand Nolan, and I hope that the reader does. And so that idea of what am I going to be stubborn about and what am I going to be flexible about, and I even do it with my daughter now, like homework has to get done, but okay, if you don't want to eat your vegetables, there's times when we bend and times when, and I think being completely inflexible about everything is a really bad idea. But of course, being flexible about everything is a bad idea as well.
Oh, that's pretty good. I love the things that you just talked about, and I think you're absolutely right about not just being able to shift, to be able to, as I always tell people, I think that goals may not change, but your plans to meet the goal may change. And so being adaptive, having this adaptive leadership style, I think is a must core requirement for any leader, and that's great. I'll kick it
Yeah.
back over to Alex.
Yeah, no, Russ, I thought that was brilliant. I love the parallels between on the basketball court. I mean, at halftime, you got to switch that up. But then thinking about even parenting, how sometimes you have to have that balance of where's the hard line stance and when can you be flexible and adjust. I think that's awesome. And speaking of adjusting or transitioning, I was thinking about your story in particular and thinking about how I think some can find it really intimidating to go from a successful coaching career or something similar into a different arena, such as you did with teaching, teaching and writing and things like that. And I wondered if you could just talk us through just a little bit about that transition and maybe what advice you would share. I mean, with any coaches that are passionate about the game but maybe you're thinking about going a different direction, or even if they're not a coach, what are lessons that you've learned as your life and your career has went through the evolutions?
Well, I've got where I think, Alex, it's a funny thing to say, and that, I don't know if I've ever heard a coach say it, but I've told parents that the only thing you should say to your kid until he gets to be about age 16 or she gets to be 16 or 17 is to say to her, "Did you have fun?" Because I think we can burn kids out if we're critical of them, or if it's not about fun until they get to be about a junior in high school. I think it should only be about fun. But I've also gotten where I think that the real purpose of sports that we should all embrace, and I'm still struggling with this to this day, is what it really teaches you is everybody's good at winning. Morningside wins the championship, and they lift up Cleo and he cuts down the net, and everybody's good at that. What the real value I think of sports is what are we going to do when things go badly? And as Cleo says about being humbled, things are going to go badly in sports. Even if you're Michael Jordan, there's going to be a time when you're knocked off that pedestal. And I think it's something I still struggle with is how do we react when things go badly? And I think as a coach, I don't want to throw a tantrum. I don't want to get thrown out of the game. I don't want to get a DWI because I'm under pressure and I start drinking too much or whatever it is. And I think the real message is, the time to really, sort of drill down on your team is, now when things go badly, we're not gonna lose our cool and our dignity and our grace and our togetherness are everything here, and that we've got to move on. And I think the only way to learn from your mistakes is not to throw a tantrum or to sulk. It's going to you want it to sting. I've been there on the opposite side of it too, where we would, when I was the coach at Von Steuben years after Cleo and I had been there, the kids were laughing on the bus after a team loss, and that really bothered me as well. But in general, we have to learn how to lose. Everybody's good at winning. There's nobody who's not a good winner. It's is how are we going to move forward when we lose, and how are we going to look at our losses? And we want it to sting, but we don't want it to devastate us either.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think those are important lessons that it's easy when things are going our way, you know what I mean? It's how we react when things necessarily aren't. But I really love that. Cleo.
I think it's pretty interesting the fact of how life is not linear. I mean, you go this way from A, B, C, D. Life is more this way, and things happen. And right now, you're going to be speaking to students in college. Just also be exposed to high school students and some aspiring leaders, some alumni that are looking to probably shift career paths. And the thing I want to ask you, Russ, is did here you are, you're an author, you're a teacher, you've had a chance to coach, you recruited across the country. Were these things planned for you, Russ? And when they came about for you, just share with the folks today a little bit of your path and how you we're able to accomplish those things.
Well, a big part from I was always a big reader, and so even on the the team bus or the team airplane, when everybody else had a Sports Illustrated or their headphones in, I always had a book, and I would often go to. I have to say I think in general television is mostly a waste of time, just as the internet can be mostly a waste of time, and I think you have to be very selective about it. And so I made up my mind in about 1988. I got rid of my television and I was only reading at night. And so a lot of coaches would go home and our players too would go home and watch. That's when ESPN was first starting to take off. But I just felt like I knew enough basketball that I wanted to sort of broaden my horizon. So I would say the first thing is to turn off the TV and not waste too much time on Facebook or Twitter or those kinds of things. But also, I know that when I left Division I basketball and went back to graduate school, I wound up for 2 years in Ireland, which is the lowest level of pro basketball on the planet. Uh, but one of the things that really helped me in Ireland was, I think one of the things that really helped me in Ireland was I needed a window into sort of Irish culture. I just couldn't get through to my team, and we came in last place. And I was taking Irish fiddle lessons, and it really helped me to sort of think about what the players were going through. I was a beginner on the Irish fiddle, and in some ways they were beginners, you could say, in learning the American tradition of basketball. They weren't total beginners, but they were beginners as far as I was concerned. And I think it really helped me to think about, to find some sort of common ground that I could talk by learning about the music. I was also able to learn about the Irish history, and I think it really is able. It's the reason I don't think I could ever coach again. Is I don't know that I could relate to kids. Like I don't know. I'm so far away from pop culture and so far away. But at one time I could really talk to recruits and talk the talk about Chicago and talk about what's the best pizza or where's the best Polish sausage or those kinds of things. But for me, the music was always a great window, and I've tried to use it, as you know, Cleo, with my own daughter. Is it gives us something to talk about. I can always talk to her about the music because she's a fiddle player as well. And I remember a good friend of mine told me that he always was fighting with his dad all the time as a teenager, but they could always talk about the Chicago Cubs.
That's
That
right.
was a peaceful thing to talk about. Is what's
Yeah.
will the pitching ever come through, and and we should move this guy to shortstop or whatever it was. And I think finding a common ground and something that you could just some sort of bridge to connect. Because I think one of the things that happens to us as teachers, I know it happens to me as a teacher, and maybe in the business world, is there's this disconnect where what I'm asking the students to do, they just don't get it, and I just don't get them. It's not because neither of us are smart, but we've got to struggle and find that bridge where we can connect, and through the connection, I think you sort of gain a trust and sort of this. And as you know, sports and music are really great. Sort of almost like this universal language. Like if you've got something, if you can find something in common, then, and I think we all do it. Before we started the show, I was asking Alex about his own background. He's just trying to find something, some sort of background and some sort of common ground.
No, that's great. I think it's the thing that it's amazing that sports, music are some of the I would call apolitical things that really will connect us and that binds us. That it's cross generational, cross culturally. You can travel the world and meet somebody somewhere else in India and have the favorite a favorite group, a favorite music genre, or maybe a favorite sports team, and those are the things that connect us. So appreciate that, Russ. We're just gonna
Well,
have to go ahead, Russ. Go ahead.
I think it's also. Oh, sorry. I was going to say I think it's also happened. Where even with political parties, I don't want to get into a political debate here. Many ways we want the same things. We want safer streets, or we want the virus to go away. We want there's and we have to find. I mean, that's the real key is to sort of find common ground and highlight the things we do well together. I know as a team it was important, and as a teacher it's important. And it seems to me I'm not a political animal so much, but it does seem to me that that's a big problem too. And the idea that I hear people say it all the time, like I said it myself a minute ago, that the students just don't get it, and the students are probably thinking my teacher just doesn't get it, and that kind of language is actually, I think, be able to find. And so for me, the music has always been a great connector. Even before I got interested in the Irish music, it was through our friend Jack Silver that I got interested in the Temptations and Al Green, and I'm not African American, but I loved African American music and those kinds of things. We have to find those, and that's what sports has been, of course, as well.
Fantastic. Alex.
Yeah, no, when I was hearing you answer that and talk a little bit, I think about interests versus positions, right? We might all have some of the same interests, but then we take different positions to get there, and it's getting past those so we can find that common ground. As we wrap it up, this interview, one final thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about or hear a little bit about is talk to us about your next venture in Ireland.
Well, I've lived in Ireland a couple for maybe 3 years total up to this point, but I won what they call a Fulbright. It's an academic fellowship, and so I'll be going to Ireland, and I'm going to be trying to write a book or at least a magazine piece about. There's a strange phenomenon in Ireland. Their sort of their national sport is called Gaelic football, and there's a sort of a related sport that's like lacrosse, maybe called hurling. Gaelic football's somewhere between rugby and soccer. It's more of a speed game than rugby, but you use your hands too, unlike soccer. But there's a strange phenomenon. There's these refugees that have come from Syria, from the terrible civil war in Syria, and the children are playing Gaelic football. And so you'll see, if you look on the roster, it's kind of funny. You'll see there's Paddy O'Brien, and there's a kid named Paddy O'Brien. There's a kid named Kevin O'Donoghue, and Muhammad Akbar's on the team. And I just love the idea. I know for me, what sports, if it wasn't for sports, I wouldn't have met Cleo Franklin. And I think we've all got to find, sports has always been a great sort of equalizer, and also has been at the forefront of social change. And so I'm interested. There's a big anti-immigrant sentiment in parts of Europe now, but there's also this strange phenomenon of the kids, the Syrian kids playing Gaelic football. And I just love that story, that if you're going to be honest and work hard at sports or music or whatever, that people are willing to take you, at face value and not say, I don't want to play with an African American guy, or I'm not playing with them. I love the idea of sports and music being this great equalizer.
Very good.
Fantastic. Russ, we appreciate it. Listen, folks, we're talking to Rus Bradburd, author, teacher, fiddle player, coach extraordinaire. And Russ, where can people find your books?
Well, you'd have to, I guess on Amazon, or from bookshop.org is a good one, because the author gets another 50 cents or something. But if they just put my name together, it's one S, rusbradburd.com, and there's all kinds of stuff there. And I've written for Slam magazine and New Mexico magazine, but yeah, the 4 books are all pretty easy to find.
Absolutely. He's written for you.
I know, in Iowa City at Prairie Lights Bookstore, they carry my books.
Well, Russ, anything as we part, anything for the audience that just a parting shot?
No, but I would just say, go Morningside, and I look forward to coming back to Sioux City at some point.
All right. Thank you, Russ. Again, we have Rus Bradburd, author, and kicking us off here with the Franklin Leadership Series as we dive into sports and coaching and transferable skills to not just business, life, and your livelihood. Thanks, Russ, for being with us today. Appreciate you. All the best.
Thanks so much, Russ.
Thanks.